Hello everybody and welcome to a new video on my channel. So in today's video I'm going to talk about Kirsten IV and him regarding an essay that I did in university about him, which is about different factors that affected the decision making of Kirsten IV during 1626 to 1631, and the factors that I've chosen is memento mori, Christianity, and more specifically Protestantism, and then the betrayal that Kirsten Munk put him through. So I will just, start with some background. So in Europe during this time there was a 30 Years' War, and this was very much a religious war, and it was Catholics against Protestants. Denmark went into the war, and they were a Protestant nation. They had to withdraw from the war and, get the title as, the losers because they lost the war. And during this time, when the war ended, in the very late part before they withdrawed, Kirsten Munk started her infidelity against the king. And this infidelity, she openly proclaimed that she loved that man, but she never openly proclaimed that she loved King Kirsten IV. And King Kirsten IV had proclaimed openly that he loved her, but she didn't do that, and then she proclaimed her love only for another man that she met through that Denmark, went into the 30 Years' War. In 1630, Kirsten Munk got sent away from the courts because of her infidelity. And, okay, I just realized I said wrong numbers. I have 1625 to 1631, because in 1625, Kirsten IV, there's a letter from a bishop about that Kirsten IV claimed he had seen visions of Jesus. So that's why. And it's also in 1625 that Denmark entered the 30 Years' War. And then in 29 they withdrew. In 30 she was sent away. In 31 he had these paintings made of himself, where he both partly had, the paintings where he has visions of Jesus, and a painting where he's almost symbolizing and like Jesus, he is the savior of the Danish people. If I have pictures, I will put in pictures so it makes more sense. And then I looked at those pictures, his letters. I read over 300 letters in Danish from 1626 to 1631 is the letters that I read, and I read all of those letters in that extract, because this is of course not all the letters that King wrote during this time, but those are the ones that I could find without having to go on a Denmark road trip, because I do my studies in Lund, which I think has more Danish literature, partly because, Lund used to be Danish, because Lund is in Skåne, and Skåne used to be Danish, and then it became Swedish after it had been Danish for quite some time. And I analysed those letters for looking at memento mori, and there's not, the thing about memento mori is that you cannot look for him saying memento mori in the letters, because memento mori is more used in art and visualizing. You see a skull and then that means memento mori in this time. And so what you look for is more if the king knows, or how does the king view his life? Does he think he is almost immortal? Is he aware that he's going to die? And then linking that with Christianity and how a good Christian should be living according to the Bible, and looking at that together, and then you can see the whole part with forgiveness in the Bible, and how a human, a good Christian should be forgiving. Because, you know, even in the Bible, you could see that Jesus forgave Judas, even if Judas, you know, sent Jesus to his death. Or, like, not knowingly, but, you know, he was, you know, the one that kind of set the whole thing in motion, which caused to Jesus' death. And Jesus still forgave Judas. And then you can see here that Kirsten IV never really forgave Kirsten Munk. And there's also quite a bit of an age gap between Kirsten IV and Kirsten Munk. And also to add a little bit more on the whole Kirsten Munk, Kirsten IV. Kirsten IV was married before, and that marriage, and that was his queen. She was the queen of Denmark, but then she died. Then he had his lovers and mistresses, and, you know, he had a lot of that, you know, as many do. And he never married one of those. Instead, he found then later on Kirsten Munk, and he wanted to take her as his mistress, but Kirsten Munk is like lower in the nobility, so she couldn't be queen, but she still should be more than just a mistress, because she still is, or she was, a noble lady. So therefore, Kirsten Munk's mother, Ellen Marsvin, made sure that something more, you know, happened out of it. So they married. However, she didn't become queen consorts or queen. You know, she wasn't queen. She was married to the king. He was the king, still had his king position. But even though Kirsten Munk was married to him, she wasn't queen. To get that straight. So that means she could own her own properties and things, such as a queen usually couldn't do during this time. Own her own properties and things. So they were married until they weren't because of her infidelity. Okay, so looking at the letters, and I know I'm jumping a bit, but if you want me to go more deep diving into something, because I need to do this like short, because if I'm going to like talk about the whole essay, this video would be many hours. So that's also why I'm talking so shortly and like perhaps skipping some parts that aren't like that important to the whole essay thing, like side characters you kind of would say. So with the levers, you can see there I looked for when he mentioned God and how did he mention God, and like the whole religious view. So he mentioned God in a way that when he wished someone luck, so it's more like, you know, kind of like say, oh, God bless you. He was more into saying and mentioning God in those ways. Or if he wanted to show off, you know, the power that he had when he was speaking to the Privy Council. So then he mentioned God as well. This shows, you know, through all the letters that I read, you know, you mostly saw that he mentioned God when it was pushing on his own, you know, where he stands and the whole power thing, you know, that he is on top and God put him there. You know, like claiming his power. That's when he mentioned God. And he then also, you know, mentioned God as a like good luck. So it was kind of a bit shallow sometimes when he mentioned God. And then he kind of almost, you know, took the whole God, you know, that because they believed in so they had, you know, absolutism, which means, you know, that the power they had came from God, and that was, you know, why they were fit to be in the throne, because they are put to be there from God. You know, they're like the messenger from God that's put down on this earth. That's, you know, quite the strong claim that he had to the throne, and that also, you know, was like messaging to, you know, the ones that were against him, his oppositions and enemies and all that, you know, the ones that wanted to take the throne, because there is the whole thing, you know, when he lost the war, his wife was cheating and everything was down, and people were just like thinking, should he even be the king, you know? And there were talks about rebellions against him, and to reclaim the power he used absolutism very much, which he did with those paintings, that he's like claiming that he has visions of Jesus. almost like he is, kind of used in a way that he's almost some type of prophet. It's like, how many monarchs claims that they are seeing visions of Jesus and are talking with Jesus himself? That's rare. And for a monarch to do that and to be like, I am the savior of this kingdom. I'm like the Jesus, the savior. But for Denmark. That's kind of what he did with the whole, he painted himself out to be Jesus. And it was also to make the Danish people even more, Christian, and that they would follow what the Bible said. Which, of course, is a little bit funny because Christian IV didn't really follow the Bible if we're looking at the forgiveness and just, he had very many mistresses during his life. He wasn't, faithful to his first wife. And, with the pattern of how he acted, there is almost like a tendency that he might, we don't know if he was faithful to Kirsten Munk or not, but, looking at his past, there is a high chance that he wasn't faithful to Kirsten Munk. But, if you also think that if he actually was faithful to Kirsten Munk, you can also understand why the whole losing the war and then her betrayal hit him so hard. And then that because in times of crisis we usually look to religion and we go deeper into our religion and our religious views. And some people say they found God when they had a hard time in their life. He already had God, and then he took the whole God, and he kind of felt like, oh, Denmark, you didn't need any saving for that, and you're just like saving, and get to the whole savior. And it's like, we need a savior, and then he can be like, oh, I'm the king, I can be the savior, almost like that vibe. So he turned into religion, and also with the whole religion, he can also like tell Kirsten Munk that God sees what you're doing, and like almost as a threat. Because he was very much on threatening her almost afterwards. And, even years after, he was always like on and on her, he was always like on and never really letting the whole thing go. He was always like onto her. So she wasn't really free from Christian IV until he died. And on his deathbed in 1638, he wanted Kirsten Munk to be there. But she didn't make it in time until afterwards. So, I think with the whole that, it also proves that he actually did love her. But then, it was, perhaps, in a messed up way, because he almost like, he wanted her so much harm, but then, also she harmed him. Probably, severely if he was faithful to her, because, that it's different. It's one thing if he was cheating and she was also cheating on him. But it's one thing if he really believed in it and she then cheated. And of course, the whole thing that he proclaimed his love, she didn't proclaim his love. That's a hard thing. It must have been a blow to his ego, looking at the whole thing, that he had always to be onto her. And then, he was like, I'm Jesus. And, it's just, didn't say he was Jesus, but like he's on those pictures. Okay, I really wish I hope I have pictures, but then, he's dressed and like almost like Jesus, and the whole how Jesus was having the thorn crown on his head and all of that like Jesus did. In the essay I also did like I drew some parallels between David in the Bible and Christian IV with the whole prophet thing. And that Christian IV might have like recognized himself in David in the Bible. David was also known for focusing on piety. I hope I pronounced that right. But just like devotion to religion, in this case Christianity. But Christian IV was like very much on religion, and you can see it if you just open up his Wikipedia page. You'll see his royal saying has with it to do. When he was like in the churches, he had it engraved. I wouldn't say that you see really the devotion in him to religion and the way he writes. It's more that he believes God put him in the throne, and that's like he's meant to be there, and he's higher up than others. Almost like a tool, claim, the whole absolutism. And then also, like a casual everyday saying. Like some people say, oh my god, or holy god, or like that. You know, so sometimes some people say that even though they are not really believing in God or God's existence. And I'm not saying he didn't believe in God's existence, but I'm just saying, you know, it might be that he wasn't that devoted to religion truly, and that he more used it as, you know, a political tool to like have more control over the kingdom. I feel like there's more signs of that from what I've interpreted from all, which is also quite common during this time, you know, that you really pushed and used religion as a political tool. The motive to why he did those paintings, you know, to reclaim authority over the throne, and like that he wouldn't have rebellions against him, and to show like people that he is special and he truly should be king because he has these visions. And which other monarch has visions of Jesus himself and talks to Jesus? But I also think everything shows that he was really hurt through Kirsten Munk's betrayal, which also caused him to do the whole almost spiraling into the whole getting those paintings done, partly because of that, almost like a step back, like, see, I have Jesus close to me and I am the closest a human can like get to God, you know, because he's like the messenger of God, you know, and absolutism of that. So God placed him there, you know, he's like he has a different connection and all of that to God than, you know, and any other human does, you know, because the monarchs were placed there by God and all that, you know, so I think he pushed it, as I said. Okay, thank you so much for watching this video, and goodbye.